What makes an excellent leader? And are they really that scarce? And what do they do to merit such exceptional compensation? Welcome to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. Your host is one of the world's leading experts on international leadership. She's a master certified coach and facilitates a mastermind for CEOs of international companies. She's the author of 3 books, Abrasive Leaders, Global Nomadic Leaders, and Managing Brilliant Jerks. She has worked with Nestle, Novartis, and even the United Nations. She's especially good at helping executives fast track to the C-suite. Welcome, Dr. Katrina Burrus.
Welcome to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katrina Burrus, and today we have Nicole Jensen. Nicole, you are the most welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me here. I'm excited to be here with you, Dr. Katrina, and have this conversation.
So Nicole is a strategic advisor and leadership coach. So let's start right away. So where does true transformation begin, Nicole?
You know, true transformation, and the way I define transformation is changing and transforming something from one thing into a completely other thing, like the caterpillar to the butterfly, that it doesn't go back to the old thing. So when I talk about that, the first step is really awareness. To be aware, and if the transformation that we're looking to create is within ourselves, then it is the self-awareness. With others, then it is awareness and being fully present with the other person, what's going on, so that we can start to create change. You can't change something that you first are aware of.
Okay. So self-awareness and being present with the other to be able to notice them and to connect. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it's tuning in. Now, there's a lot to that. It sounds simple, and it is simple, but not necessarily always easy, because we have all of these other factors, right? We have the world, the distractions, the considerations, all the things that are going on, our own little voice, our own past experiences, our fears, our doubts, our beliefs, all of that, which clutters the environment. And so oftentimes it can prevent us from having the level of awareness that we need to have without judgment, to be able to really observe and to say, this is what is happening. So if it's a team, we're working within a team, it's like looking at it and saying, what's present, what's working, what's not working, what are we learning, how are we moving forward? And so that requires a certain measure of safety, a measure of being secure in who we are. Because if we're trying to prove, if we don't feel secure, if we're trying to prove ourselves, trying to make sure that we're safe or that we look good, again, that can clutter the environment to be able to actually see what is present. If I'm coaching someone, I need to when I'm coaching people, like even beforehand, I need to make sure that I've done the inner work on myself, that when I'm coming into that conversation, I'm not bringing my stuff into the conversation. And if my story is showing up, that's because that's an indication for me that I need to get some clearing. I need to get some processing separate, so that I'm fully present with them to sit and hear not just what they're saying, but what they're not saying. And you know this, with your experience, it's like there's so much going on, and to become present to that and then say, what do we do with that? So this is what is. Now the next is choice. Now that we are aware, what do we do with that? And then, of course, there is the follow through. There's the commitment to that. Just because we decide to do something doesn't mean we actually are going to do it. It's actually following through with that. And transformation, as much as you can get ahas very quickly, you can be at a seminar and all of a sudden you have this, or on a coaching, call or whatever, it's like you get this huge aha. But there's the fortune is in the follow through. It's now, what does that mean? How do I apply that to my life? And how do I use that? Now I've got to change the habit patterns that I have so that I can create true lasting transformation from the caterpillar to the butterfly. And there's no possible way for the butterfly ever to go back to become a caterpillar again.
Right. So basically is have a choice and good follow through, right?
Yes.
So let's take it to your business. You had an 8-figure business failure. So what did you learn? And how did you develop a resilient mindset and do the necessary transformation to get out of that situation?
Yes. So when we built that I honestly thought that's what I was going to do for the rest of my life. It was a very successful business, 8 figures in the 90s.
In what area?
I was in direct sales.
Mm-hmm.
So we had thousands of people on our team and our organization. We had business in, well, I don't know if it was 10, 11 countries and just growing quite rapidly. And there were certain issues that happened and it just imploded. And that's a story. But to your question is when it fell apart, first of all, I had a pity party. My parents and I was a partner with them. We had a pity party of like, why me? Why did this happen to us? We're good people, all that kind of thing. And very good environment to be able to create awareness and clarity. But so we had that kind of pity party and then we moved on. And one of my favorite questions is so what, now what? So this is what happened. Now what are we going to do with this? And so that's when I entered into that phase of awareness, of really understand what actually happened and what I learned through it and who am I? The big questions of life, right? Who am I? What's my purpose to offer? And really into those questions and had to be honest with myself. Because if I go from a victim mindset and I say those people did, and it's their fault that the business fell apart, then I actually put them in control of my future outcomes as well, because it's all based on what's outside. So, I can only be successful this and that, and they do this. And so I had to take ownership of that and say, how did we contribute to this? What was part to play in this? And then from there.
So give us an example, because you have a personal experience. So what ownership did you have to take?
Yeah. So one of the first things was for us is that we were, actually I talk about my parents being loyal to a fault. So things started to go sideways. They were trusting some of the business partners that were, in business, and they said, everything will work out. It's almost like not playing ostrich, but a little, everything will work out. God's going to take care. It's all going to be fine. Yes. And we could have done some things differently to help protect our team and the organization as a whole from the things that were going on, which was like there was some dissension. So we had in our team, we had people that kind of started around us and tried to create relationships and undermined the leadership of my parents in particular and saying, well, they don't know what they're talking about. You need to list us. And so that type of thing needs to be addressed quickly. And we didn't do it quickly. We didn't nip it in the bud. And so, looking back and saying, what could we have done different? And then again, look at, even myself and saying, okay, this did happen. So what, now what? Now I look at it and say, okay, so we made some mistakes.
So addressing the issue when you first perceive it quickly.
Yes.
Even if it was unpleasant to think that your employees are maybe have passive aggressive or discredit you, but to address it right away.
Yes. And confrontation is not necessarily a bad thing. Some people, they try to avoid confrontation at all costs. And sometimes you do need to confront, which is to stand in front of something, the issue, and face it and address it quickly so that it doesn't become a bigger thing, right? It's like cut it down when it's a twig versus wait till it's an oak tree. What happened with us? It became this huge oak tree, and then it's much harder to deal with. And then looking at it from the standpoint of saying, okay, these are the mistakes that we made, or these are the lessons that we got out of it, because we learned through our mistakes and course correcting. And then it's like, now what can I do with this? So, if somebody has got a team, and I work with leaders and their organizations, so if there's a team and they're having challenges, it's again, yes, it's nipping in the bud. For them, it may be something different that's going on, right? This awareness will bring out, this is what's happening. And then we need to address it quickly and do it in such a way that serves the greater good, that serves the greater mission. And oftentimes I find that teams and leaders lose sight of the greater picture. Like, what are we doing this for? The vision.
So give us an example, even though it's easy to understand, if you could give us a few examples to make it concrete in a person's mind.
Sure. So for example, let's say a team, their responsibility is sales and marketing. They're growing the business, they're selling, they're doing all the things that relate to that. Now, there was particular, there's a couple people in the team that were actually sabotaging the team because they had been with the organization from the beginning, and the team has grown, and now they're all these people in and these leaders who are now their supervisors, and they were overtly resisting the leadership. They were resisting the feedback, and they were actually sabotaging their leaders. And so what they were doing is they were putting the individual first above the mission. So, you need to prioritize mission first, team second, individual third. When you do that, have a worthy mission, the mission determines your decisions. Does this help us move our mission forward? Yes, great. Then we don't do it, or we look at it in a different perspective.
So you confront the people that are having passive aggressiveness or even overt aggression towards the leadership and underline it and say, this is a bigger mission. You're aligned or you're not. Is that what you're saying?
Well, actually, in that case, it was a little bit more complex because the leader was the one to me. And I said, okay. So again, just like in my example, in saying, okay, well, you can say this person is doing such and such, and you can address it with them, and that may or may not actually create a positive outcome. And look in the mirror and say, where am I contributing to this? And how do I need to shift my leadership style so that feels secure in their position? And that's where we started. So we started with her and looking at, in particular, because it was directed, is we looked at who is she being in this situation. And as she shifted her and started to understand how she was showing up and how she could show up differently, she could show up, then from there, she had the conversation with the people. One of them actually ended up leaving the company. The one that stayed, she actually had a conversation, but now she had a conversation from a place of not, you're wrong and you need to fix this, otherwise you're out. It was more from a point of, I don't know what it is that I'm doing that is impacting you, but let's figure out how we can work together on this. And so taking that joint ownership, let's partner in figuring out how we can move forward together. And that was a much more effective outcome because she had tried it the other way before. The important thing with her was that she needed to let go of judgment. She needed to let go of her own story and her own, how could she do that? Like, I'm the boss and, like all of that ego. She had to set that aside and look at what is the outcome here? The mission, if you will, in this scenario is that I want this person who actually brings great value to the team, otherwise with their performance and like the things that they normally do, their job, their role is this person. I want to be able to work together with this person. We can move forward and grow, continue the company. That's the desire.
So always the perspective of what's best for the company and also not getting involved in your ego or an authoritarian type of leadership. Instead, engage your employee to participate in the strategy of how to move forward towards this mission.
Yes, and it's the greater good. So the company, it may be the relationship. I posted something on Facebook the other day and it brought up some interesting comments, but it's like the idea of do you need to be right? And do you want to be right? Or do you want to have a great relationship? And sometimes I'm a big fan of yes and either or. In that case, a lot of times people will choose to be right, sacrifice the relationship and that comes back, bottom line, it all comes back to, a not enoughness. When we don't feel secure in ourselves, then we have to do things to secure ourselves. So we need to do things to survive and protect and build ourselves, because deep down inside, there's a conversation around, I'm not enough. And I'm trying to prove that I am enough. That's why a lot of actually overachievers, it's interesting that, they are very successful. But if you ask why they are so driven, many of them actually are doing it because there's somehow like this idea of failing is not an option, but it's not from a place of love. It's a place of fear. Like, I'm trying to outrun the fear that I have that I'm really not enough. I'm not good enough, fast enough. I'm trying to prove to a parent or somebody that said that I wasn't enough. And so they actually overachieved, to prove otherwise. And then, like in my case, when the business fell apart and now we're sitting there with, having lost everything, you realize it's like, wow, because I kind of was doing that myself, right? It was like proving it was enough. And then all of a sudden everything falls apart. And who are you without all of those things? And that's when you really get to the real question of identity and having a confidence in yourself and knowing that your value comes from who you are, not necessarily what you do. It's the be that leads to the do that leads to having versus the other way around.
So being more in the being rather than the doing.
Yes. The being leads to doing. So I talk about a results model. People say, they come to me because they create some better result. And results come from actions. They come from the practical things that we do day in, day out, the behaviors. But what influences those actions and those behaviors is our mindset. And so if you can look at mindsets, I need to change my mindset. I can read positive thinking books. I can do all this self-help and so forth. And that's great. But what influences, and this was the question I had for myself, is like, what really influences mindset? Well, it is our natural, like our personality or the strength we're born with. There's the human needs, fundamental core human needs. It's also the beliefs that we have about ourselves. It's the beliefs that we have about others and the world around us, in fact. So, and the lens in which I see the world around me is the lens through which I see myself. So that's why it starts off, who am I being? How am I perceiving myself? Because if I am insecure, if I am judging myself, if I'm not feeling confident in myself, then I'm going to see others through the lens of not enoughness or judgment. If you're judging others, it's probably because you're judging yourself even more so. I had somebody recently sent me a message. We were talking back and forth, and she said, I'm really sensitive. She had some issue going on, somebody that I know in the community here, not a client or anything. And she said, I'm really sensitive to people judging me, and this person doesn't want to talk to me anymore, and I don't know why, and just a lot of story and a lot of drama and so forth. And the reality is that as much as she was experiencing judgment and criticism she felt from another person and or multiple other people, it was not even as half as much as the judgment criticism that she had for herself. So it starts with us. That's where the awareness. It's like, who am I? Why? What do I believe to be true about myself? Then she can realize that and stop judging herself. She may find that others judge her less as well.
And you mentioned that the mindset is a combination of needs and beliefs. What happens if someone grew up in an environment that's where a lot of needs weren't met, which, as you mentioned, causes a certain amount of fear or a certain amount of self-judgment? Those needs, it's difficult through life to have them be met later on in life. So what do you propose? And what do you do to have this person feel that they're enough?
Yes. Sometimes they can't go back, and so it's a person that they can reconcile with. A lot of times that isn't the case. And so to your point, they may have an unmet need from a parent, or something happened to them with, family or whatever the case is. And so number one, again, it comes back to that awareness of recognizing and then looking at it and saying, okay, how can I get that need met now? How can I fill that need? I have a lot of clients of mine female clients actually, that have had difficult relationships with their father, not fathers, let's just put it that way, not faithful, not kind, abusive in some cases, fathers. And so, they get frustrated and wish for that relationship, or they get it and say, okay, the acknowledgement that you sought from your father, how can you give that to yourself? And if somebody is a faith-based person, we can also talk about father, their heavenly father, and apply that. But it's really about, how can I give that to myself? Because bottom line, if we're expecting others to meet our needs, we're always going to be disappointed. There's a book out there which I'm just starting to read, and it's excellent. I think it's like 25 or 30 years old. It's called Marriage on the Rock.
Marriage on the
Rock.
Okay.
And it's a Christian book, so it's based on the principles, but it's basically, putting God first, right? Because in the Bible it talks about love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then love one as yourself. And there's a lot in there. It's this idea of loving that, having an honor and a respect for a higher power. and then loving one another as we love ourselves. The problem with the golden rule, and why even people talk about now the platinum rule, which is do unto others as you they would like you to do unto them, versus golden rule, which is do unto others as you would like to have them do unto you. Well, the problem with, and the reason why people struggle with the golden rule is because they don't love themselves. They don't treat themselves well. And if I don't treat myself well, then I teach people how to treat me, right? So if I don't treat honestly myself well and love myself fully, some people feel it seems like they're being self-centered, but they're actually insecurity. But when they truly love themselves and accept themselves and they're filled up, they now have the ability to love another person the way that they would like to be loved and sense what they need. And so as I said, coming back to this idea is, of having their needs met. The book talks about if you try to get other people, even a spouse, you expect them to meet your deepest needs, they will always disappoint you. The only one he says is the only one that can fill those deepest needs of acceptance and love, that sense of who you are, actually God. Or in some cases, people are non-believers and might say, myself, right? I fill myself up that way. And so it's really exploring with and saying, how can you get needs met in a healthy way, meeting those needs yourself? Tony Robbins talks about the human needs psychology and the four primary human needs, which are certainty, variety, love and connection, and significance. And two spiritual needs, which are growth and contribution, which not everybody gets met. But those four primary needs, we all get them met. And so, the question is, sometimes we can get those met in healthy ways and sometimes unhealthy ways. If we didn't met growing up, then we might look for healthy ways to get those met. And so now looking at it and saying, how can I get certain, for example, how can I get love? How can I get that need met in a healthy, loving way? First of all, a lot of women I talk to, especially, I give them the assignment, let's say, for example, of looking in the mirror, a simple exercise. Look in the mirror and tell yourself, I love you, love you. And you know what? Most of them give me all the reasons why they can't do that, or that they didn't do that. They come back the next week or whatever in the next session, and they go, oh, I didn't do it because. But it's very uncomfortable for many of us was for me when I first started doing the exercise, is to actually look in the mirror, look in your own eyes, and give yourself the acknowledgement and expression of love that you've been desiring from other people your whole life.
So let's link this back to leadership today. So what of these qualities or of these mindsets do you think are lacking in the leadership, and how can what you recommend help these leaders?
Great question. First of all, before you can lead others, you need to be able to lead yourself. That's number one. It starts with you. There's a gentleman, I have a podcast as well, and I had him on my show. In his book, he was talking about the fact 70% of executive leaders do not know their purpose and their true identity. And so most leaders actually out there trying to figure things out. There's a lot of imposter syndrome. What if they find out that I actually am not all that they think I am? And all of that comes down to the not enoughness, not really knowing who they are. And so I encourage leaders to really get to know yourself and accept yourself for all that you are, that you're not, and to really become friends with yourself. And when you do that, you become a great example for the people in your organization. You also increase your capacity to empathize and to connect with other people. And so that's where I would suggest that leaders begin. And that is something that is lacking right now in leadership. As a result of that, we also see a lack of integrity. People are not just, there's integrity in terms of see Enron and some of these ones. There's a lot of lack of integrity in terms of ethics. But the biggest area that it starts off with us is that most people, they have a lack of integrity with others because they have a lack of integrity with themselves. They are out of integrity with themselves. And if I'm out of integrity with myself, pretty sure I'm out of integrity with you and everybody else. It's the example of people saying, and this is a simple thing, but it's a very profound thing. People want to build confidence. A lot of time leaders, they struggle, ones that I work with sometimes struggle with confidence. And we look at why do they struggle with confidence. One of the things is that their word, they say something, they'll say, I'll do this, or I'll meet you, or I'll send you this, and then they don't. And every time they do that, they are literally re-emphasizing the being out of integrity with themselves. Their word, and they know it's subconscious, but their word doesn't mean much, right? Say I'm doing this, but I know that I won't do it. It's the same thing with goals. They set goals and they don't stick to the goals. They don't focus on the goals. I had leaders tell me I hate goals because I never achieve them. And so again, this is this idea of being out of integrity with ourselves. Do what you say what you mean.
Thank you very much, Nicole. We're coming at the end of our podcast. Where can people get a hold of you?
Then go to leadersoftransformation.com. And my podcast is Leaders of Transformation, and also some coaching information on there and some of the things that if somebody wants to schedule a time to talk through their specific situation and how to move forward in that, they can go to discovertheedge.com/coaching, and there is a link to my calendar.
Thank you very, very much, Nicole. Thank you. We would love to know what you thought of this podcast. Write us an email at drkatrina with a K at excellentexecutivecoaching.com. We would love to hear what you liked and what we could improve. This podcast has been sponsored by excellentexecutivecoaching.com.
Thank you for listening to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. You can subscribe to all future podcasts at excellentexecutivecoaching.com. Join us each Wednesday to learn more about the latest trends in leadership techniques and bring your coaching to the next level. To learn more about Dr. Burris' CEO Mastermind, use the contact form at excellentexecutivecoaching.com.